From the plains to the mountains, the piney woods, and the Gulf Coast. Let's take a look at the history of the second largest state. Starting with the Paleo Indians. Made up of the Pueblo, Mesoamerican societies, and hunter-gatherer societies like the Clovis and the Folsom, these groups had to compete to exist in the harsh environment that was to become Texas. Fighting off large predators such as the American jaguar and wild boars, life was anything but easy. Around 500 BC, the Caddo Nation began to build permanent villages. Here they would become skilled farmers, cultivating crops such as maize, beans, and squash. They also became master potters, creating a range of functional and decorative objects. Their elaborate social structures and spiritual practices shaped the first remnants of community life. These diverse peoples started engaging in trade, intermixing ideas and goods from the Pacific Northwest to the Mississippi River Valley. They held ceremonies that expressed their deep spiritual connection to the land and their community. Fast forward to the late 15th century, when European settlers first stumbled upon the Americas. The Spanish arrived in modern-day Texas in 1519, led by explorer Alonso Alvarez de Pineda. Pineda would be the first European to map the Gulf Coast. Pineda and his crew came into contact with the native peoples of the land, marking the beginning of centuries-long cultural exchange, conflict, and transformation. By the late 17th century, Spain began to establish missions throughout Mexico in an effort to spread Catholicism among the Native American tribes. These missions, run by Franciscan priests, often forced the native people to abandon their traditional ways of life, causing significant cultural disruption. In addition to missions, the Spanish built presidios, or forts, to protect their territories from other European powers and hostile Native American tribes. This would mark the beginning of military presence and political control in the region. The relationship between the Spanish and the native peoples was not a solely adversarial one. Trade flourished in the New World and led to a fusion of Spanish and native cultures. Horses, introduced by the Spanish, would dramatically transform Native American societies, leading to the pop culture version of the Plains Indians we know today. Tensions, however, would inevitably be flared. Many native groups resisted Spanish encroachment, leading to frequent conflict. The Apache and the Comanche, in particular, proved formidable foes to the Spanish colonizers. European arrival would also bring with it disease. Smallpox and measles, to which Native Americans had no immunity, would ravage the native populations, leading to over 90% of Native Americans to be eventually wiped out. By the early 19th century, a spirit of independence swept across Latin America, including Mexico. For 3 centuries, Spain had ruled its colonies with a firm hand, but the grip was weakening. Back in Europe, Spain had become embroiled in conflicts with neighboring powers, the largest of which would be the Napoleonic Wars. This conflict forced the abdication of the Spanish king, which created a power vacuum, stirring up regional resistance across the Spanish Empire. Meanwhile, in Mexico, dissatisfaction with the Spanish rule had grown. The social and racial hierarchy, known as the casta system, enforced by Spain, privileged European-born whites at the expense of those of mixed race and indigenous people. This led to a political turmoil that spilled into violence. The Mexican Revolution would begin on September 16, 1810, when Miguel Hidalgo, a parish priest, delivered the Grito de Dolores, a call to arm against Spanish rule. Along with military officer Ignacio Allende, Hidalgo rallied the people of Mexico to fight for their independence. What followed was a bloody, decade-long war. However, the revolutionaries weren't a unified group. They were a mix of peasants and indigenous people, and Creoles, those of Spanish descent born in Mexico. Each faction had its own vision for an independent Mexico, which sometimes led to the conflict within their own ranks. The tide would finally turn when Agustin I, a former royalist military officer, would switch sides. In 1821, he crafted the Plan of Iguala, which promised independence, equality, and the protection of the Catholic Church. This plan would unify the revolutionaries. On September 27, 1821, after 11 long years of war, the Spanish succumbed and recognized Mexico's independence. Following Mexico's hard-fought independence, the newly formed Mexican government faced a daunting challenge: the northern territory of the Texas state. Vast and rich in resources, yet sparsely populated and difficult to control. Seeing an opportunity, the Mexican government began to encourage immigration into Texas, believing that a significant population influx would help stabilize the region. They offered generous land grants to impresarios, agents who promised to bring settlers to the region. One such impresario was an American named Stephen F. Austin. Stephen F. Austin, often called the father of Texas, led the second and ultimately successful colonization of the region by settlers from the United States at the invitation of the Mexican government. Austin's colony would attract thousands of American settlers, drawn by the prospect of cheap, fertile land. By 1830, the population of Texas had swelled, the American settlers outnumbering Mexicans 2-1. This mass settlement led to growing tensions. Many American settlers did not adopt Mexican customs, as was required by the Mexican government. In response to the unruly nature of the American settlers and fearful of American expansion, the Mexican government enacted the law of April 6, 1830. This law sought to stop further American immigration and impose stricter control over the existing settler population. This move would backfire and would only further agitate the new settlers. Meanwhile, political upheaval in Mexico led to the rise of one of the most famous enemies of the Texas Revolution, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Before the Texas Revolution, Santa Anna had already garnered a reputation for his military prowess and ruthless leadership. This was particularly evident during the Mexican Federalist War, when his brutal crackdown in Zacatecas in 1835 rang alarm bells both in Mexico and later in Texas. The Texas War of Independence finally broke out in 1835. The commander of this newfound army was one of the most notable of Texas legends, Sam Houston. Born in Virginia in 1793, Houston had an adventurous youth that saw him living with the Cherokee tribe, an experience that left a lasting impact on his views toward Native American rights. He later joined the U.S. Army, serving under General Andrew Jackson during the War of 1812. After the war, Houston ventured into politics, representing Tennessee in Congress and later serving as its governor. But personal troubles would lead him to resign and look for a new life in a new land. In 1832, Houston moved to the Mexican lands of Texas. His time as governor of Tennessee would lead to him being appointed as the commander-in-chief of the Texan Army. The Battle of the Alamo, while not the first, was the most famous of battles fought for Texas independence. For 13 days in February and March of 1836, a vastly outnumbered group of Texan defenders held the old mission against the Mexican army under General Santa Anna. The defenders, who include famous frontiersmen like James Bowie and Davy Crockett, numbered fewer than 200, yet they withstood a siege from a force of 1,800 Mexican soldiers. However, the force would be too much to overcome, and on the 13th day, the Mexican troops finally breached the walls and overran the Alamo. Every Texan lay dead. The brave stand of these Texans became a rallying cry for the rest of Texas. Remember the Alamo. Just over a month later, General Sam Houston and his Texan army would match up with Santa Anna and his forces at the Battle of San Jacinto. Despite being outnumbered, the Texans executed a surprise attack during the Mexican troops' afternoon siesta. In a battle that lasted less than 20 minutes, the Texan army defeated Santa Anna's troops and captured Santa Anna himself. The victory at San Jacinto, following the sacrifice of the Alamo, had a profound impact on the identity of Texas. These battles symbolized the courage, determination, and fiercely independent spirit of Texans. The phrase, "Don't mess with Texas," a modern emblem of Texas pride, encapsulates this spirit leading to a new chapter in Texas history, the era of the Republic of Texas.